Before this story begins, hit that subscribe button right now, because this isn't just another fantasy romance. This is a war between power, pride, and destiny. The Cold Lycan King thought he could chain her like a slave, but 30 days later the entire kingdom would watch him kneel at her feet. If you love emotional fantasy stories filled with revenge, forbidden attraction, powerful queens, and shocking plot twists, subscribe now, because the next 2 minutes are about to change everything. The raw, metallic tang of fresh blood and burning pine ash hung heavy in the midnight air, suffocating the dark spruce forests of the Silver Moon Valley. It was exactly 30 days before the great gathering of the packs, but tonight the ancient stone courtyard of the Eclipse Citadel didn't feel like a seat of royal power. It felt like a slaughterhouse. The heavy iron gates groaned as they were flung open, and I was violently shoved forward, my bare feet cutting into the jagged frost-bitten gravel. "Move, Omega!" A brutish Lycan warrior snarled behind me, the heavy steel links of my collar rattling as he yanked the chain. The king doesn't like to be kept waiting, and he has zero patience for the livestock of a conquered territory. I didn't trip. I didn't cry out. I forced my spine into a rigid column of absolute defiance, the tattered, dirt-stained hem of my tunic brushing against the stones like a tattered flag of war. Through the courtyard, hundreds of ruthless, battle-hardened Lycan warriors were turning their heads, their low, predatory growls vibrating through the subterranean foundations of the castle. And there he sat, at the top of the obsidian dais, bathed in the eerie, silver glow of the full moon. King Kalen Vance, the alpha of alphas. A man whose terrifying reputation as the cold, emotionally dead butcher of the Northern Realms was built entirely on a foundation of crushed rebellions and broken bloodlines. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming like polished amber in the dark, filled with a dismissive, absolute cruelty. He had just slaughtered my pack's alpha, seized our ancestral lands, and now he wanted to break the last remaining survivor who refused to whimper at his feet. He honestly believed I was just a powerless captive, a fragile piece of political property he could chain to his throne to display his absolute dominance. He had no earthly idea that while his court was busy celebrating their easy victory, I was already calculating the exact structural flaws in his empire. Before we dive into the dark, intoxicating reality of how this absolute power struggle unfolded, and how the ultimate trap was set to bring the most feared ruler in the kingdoms to his knees, I want to welcome every single one of you to the channel tonight. We are diving deep into a legendary tale of supernatural resilience, high-stakes court betrayal, and the raw, unyielding power of a woman who refuses to be broken. I'm so incredibly grateful to have you here with me. Please, take a brief moment right now to drop a comment below letting me know exactly where in the world you are watching from tonight and how you are doing. Your incredible energy is what keeps this channel alive. And if you haven't already joined our growing family, please hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on your notifications and drop a like on this video. You absolutely do not want to miss a single second of the storm that is about to tear this Lycan kingdom apart. As Kalen stepped down from his throne, the sheer, crushing weight of his alpha aura slammed into the courtyard, forcing several weak-willed Omegas to slide to their knees in primal terror. He stopped just inches from me, his towering muscular frame casting a massive, suffocating shadow over my face. There wasn't a single shred of human warmth or mercy in his amber gaze, only a cold, lethal curiosity. He reached out, his thick, claw-tipped fingers gripping my jaw with a bruising force, tilting my face upward so the entire court could see my defiance. He expected to see the frantic, trembling pupils of a beaten slave. Instead, he met a gaze that burned with an ancient, unquenchable fire. Kalen knew his inner circle was rotting with secret treasons behind closed doors. He believed he was completely untouchable, and he was planning to use my public subjugation tonight to send a terrifying message to any lord who dared to question his brutal authority. He thought I was just an orphan stray who had forgotten her place in the food chain. But as I looked at the heavy silver crown resting on his dark, unruly hair, a cold, lethal calm washed over me. My heart stopped racing, replaced by the steady, rhythmic thumping of a strategist who knew that the tallest towers always have the weakest foundations. For 30 agonizing days, working beneath the notice of his mocking nobles, navigating the lethal politics of his servant quarters, and enduring the cruelty of his guards, I would systematically unearth the rotten core of his kingdom. Every single secret his treacherous lords hid, every single illegal weapon trade his generals leveraged to fund a coup, would pass through my hands while I washed their floors and served their wine. He thought he was bringing a broken slave into his castle to amuse his court. He had no earthly idea that in exactly 30 days, a devastating coup would leave him bleeding on his own throne room floor, and I would be the only person standing between him and absolute annihilation. But as Kaelin's grip tightened on my jaw, a chilling realization began to settle in the pit of my stomach. The dangerous bond growing between us was running far deeper than a simple game of survival. There were darker, ancient instincts awakening in his dormant beast. Instincts that his cold mind desperately fought to suppress, and secrets about my own bloodline that could shatter the balance of the entire supernatural world. Was I truly prepared for the devastating truth that would surface the moment the Lycan King was forced to slide to his knees before the woman he tried to enslave? The air inside the great stone hall of the Eclipse Citadel did not just feel cold. It felt ancient, heavy with the scent of dried blood, rusted iron, and the suffocating, predatory dominance of the Lycan elite. To the hundreds of highborn wolves watching from the carved stone galleries, I was Clara Ross, a nameless, packless stray dragged from the smoking ruins of a conquered borderland territory. For centuries, the Lycans of the northern peaks had viewed my people as lesser wolves, sheep to be sheared and cattle to be broken. But as I stood beneath the heavy timber beams of Kaelin's hall, the heavy steel chain of my collar dragging down on my neck, the illusion of my helplessness dissolved within my own mind, revealing the unyielding marrow of who I truly was. To understand the terrifying game I was about to play with the Lycan King, you have to understand what I lost, and what I was hiding. I was not a born Omega. I was the daughter of the Silver Moon Pack's chief scholar and tactician. While the other young wolves were out running through the forests, learning how to hunt and bite, my father was teaching me how to read the terrain, how to decode ancient military cryptography, and how to analyze the structural vulnerabilities of fortresses. I grew up learning that battles were rarely won by the sharpest teeth. They were won by the mind that predicted where those teeth would strike. My deepest, most driving motivation had never been personal glory or a desire for violence. I wanted survival for my people. I wanted to build an unshakable sanctuary where the brutal whims of tyrant kings could never reach us again. But Kaelin Vance had destroyed that dream in a single night of fire and steel. My greatest fear wasn't the pain of his lash or the labor of his kitchens. My true, primal terror was that if I let my spirit break under his cruelty, the memory of my slaughtered pack would bleed out into nothingness, leaving no one to demand justice for their unmarked graves. "Keep your head down, girl," a low, raspy whisper hissed from the shadows of the western corridor. I didn't need to turn my head to know it was Dominic Thorne. Dominic was an elder Lycan who had served the royal line for 3 generations. Now reduced to the master of the castle's domestic serfs due to a crippling leg injury he received in the old wars. He was a man of quiet observation, his face mapped with deep scars and his scent smelling of old parchment and bitter herbs. Dominic was the only one in the entire citadel who looked at me with something resembling human empathy rather than predatory hunger. He knew the politics of the court better than any high lord, and he knew that a defiant captive rarely survived her first week in the king's presence. "Let them look, Dominic," I murmured back, my voice barely a ripple in the ambient noise of the feasting warriors. A wolf who looks at the ground never sees the arrow coming until it's through their throat. Dominic shifted his weight on his heavy wooden cane, his amber eyes tracking King Kaelin as the monarch loudly tore a piece of roasted meat from the bone, dismissing a bowing general with a curt, icy nod. "The king's temper is shorter than a winter day, Clara. He isn't just a warrior, he's an executioner. The internal friction between the northern clans is reaching a boiling point, and he is looking for any excuse to spill blood to prove his grip hasn't slipped. If you defy him in front of the council tomorrow, he won't just lock you in the dungeons, he'll feed you to the winter hounds." "He can try," I replied, my fingers curling into a tight fist against my tattered tunic, the rough fabric scratching against my skin. As I watched Kaelin from across the smoke-filled hall, the sheer magnitude of his isolation was staggering. He was a king driven entirely by the need for absolute, unquestioned dominance, a trait that had made him an invincible warlord but had now turned him into a deeply isolated ruler. He trusted no one. Beside his throne stood Julianne Vance, his cousin and the commander of the royal guard. She was a viciously ambitious woman, her armor polished to a mirrored sheen, her eyes flashing with a cold, calculating malice every time she looked at Kaelin's crown. She didn't look like a loyal protector. She looked like a hawk waiting for the eagle to miss a single beat of its wings. What neither Kalen nor his treacherous inner circle knew was that I had been studying the fortress's infrastructure from the moment I was dragged through the gates. I didn't waste my breath crying when the guards threw me into the damp, straw-lined cellar. I didn't scream when the noblewomen mocked my tattered clothes as I washed the mud from the stone steps. Instead, I channeled every ounce of my grief into an intricate mental blueprint of the Eclipse Citadel. I realized that Kalen's reliance on fear had made him completely blind to the rot within his own walls. To maintain his massive army and fund his constant border wars, his lords were systematically overtaxing the outer villages, leaving the kingdom's food supply dangerously vulnerable. He thought he was being an absolute sovereign. He thought his iron fist was keeping the realm stable. But he forgot that a fist can only hold water for so long before it leaks. Through the supply manifests I was forced to carry to the cellar, and the private conversations I overheard while serving wine to the plotting lords, I was beginning to see the outline of a massive coordinated conspiracy. If you are leaning in close right now, wondering how a captive maid can dismantle a tyrant's court from the inside out, please take a quick second to leave a comment below with your thoughts on Kalen's blind arrogance. Do you think a ruler who governs only by fear can ever truly see the knife before it strikes? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to see exactly how the balance of power shifts in the dark. As the great horn sounded, signaling the end of the evening feast, Kalen turned his massive head and looked directly at me across the smoky expanse of the hall. He raised his iron chalice in a slow, deliberate motion, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on his scarred lips. He believed I was completely broken, trapped in a cage of his own making, a mere decoration for his victory. He believed that over the next 30 days he would watch me crawl on my knees for a scrap of bread. He had no earthly idea that the very chain he used to hold me was the fuse that would blow his entire kingdom apart. The heavy metallic groan of the council chamber's oak doors echoed like a death knell through the drafty corridors of the Eclipse Citadel. It was the 7th morning of my captivity, and the true test of survival had arrived. The high lords of the northern clans had gathered around the massive obsidian table, their harsh, guttural voices rising in a heated debate over the division of the conquered Silvermoon territories. I was dragged into the center of the room, my hands bound before me by heavy iron cuffs, the long chain held loosely by Julienne Vance herself. She wore her dark warrior leathers, a cruel, mocking smile playing on her lips as she shoved me forward. "Quiet." King Kalen's voice boomed, cutting through the shouting lords like a thunderclap. The entire chamber fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Kalen sat at the head of the table, his heavy silver crown gleaming under the torchlight, his broad shoulders draped in a dark cloak of winter wolf pelt. His amber eyes locked onto me, cold and unyielding, stripped of any human warmth. "The Silvermoon territory is rich in iron ore and fertile valleys," Julienne announced, her voice dripping with artificial respect as she bowed to the king. "But its people are stubborn, infected with a foolish desire for independence. To ensure they never rise again, I propose we split the remaining survivors into labor camps across the northern peaks. And as a symbol of our victory, let this woman, the daughter of their chief tactician, be branded publicly today as a permanent servant of the throne." A low murmur of approval rippled through the bloodthirsty lords. They wanted to see me break. They wanted to see the last remnant of Silvermoon pride slide into the ash. Kalen leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the obsidian table. He looked at my bound hands, then met my eyes, waiting for the terror to finally crack my stubborn expression. "You hear their counsel, Clara," he said, his deep, rumbling voice vibrating through the stone floor. "Your people are dust. Your home is gone. You have 2 choices today. You can kneel before this council, accept your status as a slave of the state and beg for my mercy, or you can let my guards drag you to the branding iron." The room grew so quiet I could hear the crackle of the pitch torches against the stone walls. Julienne stepped up behind me, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She expected me to weep. She expected me to beg the king for his pity. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the chains rattling against my wrists. I straightened my spine, looking past the glaring lords, looking past the guards, until my gaze locked directly onto Kalen's amber eyes. "I will not kneel, King Kalen," I said, my voice clear, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. And I will not beg for mercy from a king who is too blind to see that his own house is on fire. The shock in the room was absolute. Several lords gasped, their hands instantly flying to the pommels of their swords. Julienne's eyes widened in a flash of pure, murderous rage. "Insolent bitch," she snarled, raising her hand to backhand me across the face. "Hold!" Kalen roared, his alpha aura exploding into the room with such force that the torches flickered and dimmed. Julienne froze, her hand suspended inches from my cheek, her teeth bared in frustration. Kalen slowly rose from his seat, his towering figure casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the entire obsidian table. He walked around the perimeter of the room, his heavy leather boots thudding against the floor like a heartbeat, until he stood directly in front of me. The sheer, intoxicating scent of him, alpha cedar, winter frost, and raw power, filled my senses. "You speak of fire, captive," Kalen hissed, his voice dangerously low, his amber eyes narrowing into slits. "You stand in my fortress, surrounded by my warriors, and you dare suggest that I am blind? Give me one reason why I shouldn't let Julian take your tongue right now." I didn't flinch. I leaned in slightly, allowing the iron links of my chains to press against his chest armor. "Because while your lords are busy debating how to divide my people's lands, your border garrisons are starving," I whispered, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "I spent the last 3 days washing the floors of your quartermaster's office. I read the supply manifests you signed last night. Someone has been systematically altering the grain and weapon distribution logs. Your northern border is completely exposed, and a massive force is gathering in the shadow valleys, waiting for your grip to loosen." A sudden, sharp tension gripped Kalen's jaw. The cold, unreadable mask he wore fried for a fraction of a second, revealing a sudden spike of alarm. He looked from me to the documents scattered across the table, then back to my face, realizing that I wasn't just a defiant girl making noise, I was an intellectual threat. "She lies," Julienne interjected, her voice tight, a sudden, erratic panic flashing through her scent. "She is trying to sow discord among the clans to save her own skin. Sire, let me execute her now." "Silence, Julienne," Kalen ordered, his eyes never leaving mine. The air between us felt charged with an intense, volatile gravity, a dangerous spark of attraction and mutual recognition that neither of us anticipated. He saw that I wasn't afraid of his power. I understood it. If your heart is racing right now, realizing that Clara just threw the entire Lycan court into chaos with a single sentence, please hit that subscribe button immediately. Leave a comment below with the word defiance if you are ready to see this captive maid dismantle the king's corrupt inner circle piece by piece. Kalen reached down, his large, calloused hand gripping the center link of my iron chains. With a single effortless twist of his wrist, he shattered the heavy metal link, sending the shattered iron pieces clattering across the stone floor. My hands were free, though the heavy cuffs remained locked around my wrists. "The branding is postponed," Kalen declared, turning his back on the stunned council and walking back to his throne. "For the next 30 days, Clara Ross will not be a servant of the labor camps. She will be my personal chambermaid. She will wash my floors, serve my meals, and stay within my sight at all times. Let us see if her mind is as sharp as her tongue, or if she is just a pretty traitor waiting for an executioner's axe." The transition from the public defiance of the council chamber to the suffocating quiet of the king's private quarters was a descent into a completely different kind of warfare. For the next 10 days, my world became a blur of dark obsidian stone, heavy furs, and the exhausting rhythmic labor of keeping Kalen Vance's personal chambers immaculate. I carried heavy brass buckets of water up the winding spiral staircases, swept the cold hearths of winter ash, and poured his heavy black wine into silver chalices. Kalen slowly raised his large hand, and the courtroom instantly fell into a dead, suffocating silence. His amber eyes shifted from the weeping omegas on the floor, past Julienne, until they locked directly onto me, where I stood bound near the side entrance under heavy guard. There was an intense, agonizing conflict raging deep within his gaze, a silent, desperate plea for me to defend myself, to offer a piece of logic that could dismantle the trap closing around us. The dangerous emotional connection we had forged over the last 20 days was being pushed to its absolute breaking point on a global stage. "Clara," Kalen said, his deep baritone voice carrying a heavy, unvarnished hollow resonance that echoed through the stone rafters. The maps carry the distinct structural markings of your father's tactical frameworks. The council demands justice. What say you to these charges before I pronounce the sentence of death? I took a slow, deliberate step forward, ignoring the hostile glares of the guards. I didn't look at the angry mob in the galleries. I looked entirely at Kaelin, forcing my voice to remain a calm, unbreakable ribbon of absolute clarity. I say that your commander is highly efficient at staging a crime scene, King Kaelin, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet courtroom like a razor. But she is an incredibly poor student of geography. Julianne's sense spiked with a sudden, sharp wave of defensive rage. You dare insult my investigation, slave? The maps are stamped with your pack's official seal. The seal is authentic, Julianne, I replied, turning my body to face the entire Council of Lords. But the route markers drawn on those parchments indicate a supplied path through the Blackwood Pass, a gorge that was completely blocked by a massive rockslide 3 months ago during the autumn floods. My father mapped that slide himself. No Silver Moon tactician would ever design a logistics raid through a dead-end canyon. The courtroom fell into a stunned, murmuring silence. Several elder lords leaned forward, their brows furrowing as they realized the mathematical impossibility of the evidence. If the maps are a fabrication, I continued, stepping directly toward the obsidian dais, my eyes locked back onto Kaelin, then the true thief didn't need to scout the routes. They already owned them. Dominic, bring the internal server archives from the secondary archives. Elder Dominic Thorne stepped out from the shadows of the council pillars, his heavy wooden cane thudding rhythmically against the stone. He did not hold servant logs. In his trembling hands he carried an encrypted military ledger, the original unedited digital server logs from the fortress's primary distribution hub, a device that Julianne believed had been permanently wiped. Julian, Kaelin murmured, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly low, lethal register that made the entire room freeze. He rose slowly from his throne, his alpha aura expanding into the room like an suffocating tidal wave. What is the meaning of this? Sire, this is a distraction. Julianne panicked, her hand tightening convulsively on the hilt of her blade, her eyes darting toward the hidden garrison doors at the back of the hall. The slave is manipulating the council. She is trying to turn you against your own blood. Let the record speak, Commander, Kaelin ordered, his eyes never leaving her face. Dominic stepped up the steps of the dais, activating the ledger's holographic projection interface. A cold, blue light filled the courtroom, displaying the unvarnished truth of the kingdom's betrayal. The cash injections and food supplies weren't being stolen by border rebels. For 6 months, hundreds of tons of royal weapons and grain had been systematically routed to an elite, extremist Lycan faction in the Eastern Peaks, a rogue military force gathering to launch a massive, violent coup against Kaelin's crown. And at the bottom of every single unauthorized transfer log, stamped with absolute biometric finality, was Julianne Vance's personal administrative security encryption key. The betrayal was total. The very woman Kaelin had trusted to command his royal guard, the cousin who stood at his right hand, had been systematically gutting his military infrastructure from the inside out. She was planning to hand him a hollowed-out, starving kingdom, allowing the Eastern rebels to slaughter him on his own throne while she claimed the crown for herself. If your heart just stopped, realizing the sheer, terrifying depth of Julianne's absolute betrayal, please take a brief second right now to leave a comment below with the word unmasked. Hit that subscribe button immediately because the true mastermind behind this survival is about to show this court how an empire is defended. Julianne, Kaelin whispered, a profound, crushing despair breaking through his icy mask for a fraction of a second before hardening into an expression of pure, unadulterated primal fury. You used my name. You starved my borders. You betrayed our bloodline. Julianne realized the game was entirely over. The smug, superior persona she had worn for years vanished, replaced by a mask of raw, venomous desperation. She pulled her dagger from its sheath, her eyes flashing a violent, bloodthirsty crimson as she backed toward the western exits. I did what was necessary, Kaelin. Julianne screamed, her voice cracking under the strain as she signaled her loyal guards stationed at the doors. You became weak. You let a pathetic border human-born Omega alter your mind. You are unfit to wear the silver crown. If I cannot have the throne, then this entire citadel will burn to the ground tonight. The scream that tore from Julianne's throat was not the cry of a captured soldier. It was the feral, terrifying roar of a rogue alpha who had already committed her soul to total annihilation. The heavy iron gates at the rear of the grand courtroom didn't just open. They were blown off their hinges as dozens of Julianne's loyal rogue garrison warriors flooded the chamber, their swords drawn, their teeth bared in a coordinated, bloody mutiny. "Kill the king!" Julianne shrieked, her blade flashing through the smoke-filled air as she lunged toward the dais. "The throne belongs to the eastern peaks." Chaos erupted with a deafening, violent roar. The 500 noble wolves in the galleries scattered in a blind panic, their chairs overturning, their terrified screams echoing off the high stone arches. Kaelin's loyal guards threw themselves into the fray, but they were vastly outnumbered, ambushed within their own walls by the very people they called brothers. The metallic clash of steel against steel, the wet thud of falling bodies, and the pungent, suffocating scent of fresh blood turned the royal courtroom into an absolute slaughterhouse within a matter of seconds. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He shifted half into his Lycan form, his muscles expanding beneath his wolf pelt, his claws ripping through the chest plates of the first 3 mutineers who dared ascend the steps of his throne. But as he turned to face Julianne, a sudden, ragged gasp escaped his lips. Julianne's blade hadn't missed. She had slashed him across the exposed flesh of his ribs, but it wasn't a standard wound. The edge of her dagger had been heavily coated in the rare forbidden nightshade extract I had smelled on her armor days prior. I watched in horror as the veins around Kaelin's wound instantly turned a sickening, toxic black, his legendary alpha healing factor completely failing him. The cold, invincible king staggered, his knees buckling under the weight of the fast-acting poison as he collapsed against the base of his own obsidian throne. "Kaelin!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the ambient roar of the battle. Before I could run to his side, a heavy, rough hand grabbed the tattered collar of my tunic, yanking me backward into the shadows of the western corridor. It was Dominic Thorne, his face pale with a deep, profound terror, his heavy wooden cane trembling against the stones. "Clara, we have to go. Now." Dominic hissed, his grip unyielding as he dragged me toward the hidden servant tunnels. "The outer garrison has fallen to the eastern rebels. Julianne has sealed the main gates. Anyone loyal to the king is being slaughtered in the courtyard. If they find you here, they will tear you to pieces." I looked back through the smoke of the burning tapestries. Kaelin was completely surrounded, bleeding black poison onto the floor, his amber eyes growing hazy and distant as Julianne raised her sword for the final executing stroke. The man who had conquered my lands, the man who had chained me to his throne, was about to die. And with him, the last hope for any justice, any order, or any survival for my remaining pack members would vanish into the ash. An overwhelming sense of profound helplessness threatened to break my spine. I was a captive, an omega with iron cuffs still locked around my wrists, facing an army of bloodthirsty Lycan warriors. The obstacles before me felt entirely insurmountable. If I stayed, I would die. If I ran, the kingdom would fall into the hands of a tyrant who would slaughter every innocent soul from the northern peaks to the southern valleys. I was trapped in a lethal vice and the jaws were closing fast. If you can feel the absolute suffocating weight of this moment, where everything you've fought for is turning to dust in a matter of seconds, please drop a comment below with the word "Stand Tall." Subscribe to the channel right now because when a mastermind hits rock bottom, the only way left to look is up. I wrenched myself free from Dominic's grip, my eyes burning with a sudden unquenchable fire that defied my tattered clothes and my locked wrists. "No, Dominic," I whispered, my voice a steady, lethal promise that cut through the panic in his eyes. "I am not running." He thought he enslaved a victim, but he actually brought his only salvation into this castle. "Lock the secondary service doors behind me. I am going to get my king." The smoky haze of the burning tapestries filled my lungs with a bitter, choking heat, but the panic that had threatened to paralyze me moments before vanished entirely. In its place settled the cold, clinical focus of my father's daughter. I did not possess the towering muscle of a Lycan warrior, nor did I have the lethal claws of an alpha, but I possessed the map of this citadel. I knew its secret veins, its structural blind spots, and the exact weight of the shadow closing around its master. "Dominic, the fire control levers behind the dais. Are the oil lines still active?" I hissed, grabbing the elder wolf by his tattered vest. Dominic's eyes widened, a sudden, fierce understanding breaking through his despair. The winter-warming ducts. Yes. They run directly beneath the obsidian floorboards. But Clara, if you ignite them, the entire dais will become an inferno. Good, I whispered, my voice a sharp, unbreakable vow. Tell the remaining loyal servants to open the ventilation grates in the lower valleys. Let the smoke blind the rebel reinforcements in the courtyard. Give me exactly 3 minutes. I didn't wait for his response. I spun around and lunged into the smoke-choked chaos of the courtroom, my heels clicking with a rhythmic, lethal precision against the stone. I bypassed the main clashes, slipping through the deep shadows behind the heavy marble pillars where the rebel wolves never thought to look. They were looking for warriors in armor. They completely ignored the servant girl in tattered linens. At the base of the throne, King Kalen was fighting a losing battle against his own failing body. The black nightshade poison had crawled up his neck, tracing his veins like a dark web of frost. Julianne stood over him, her sword raised high, her face contorted into a mask of triumphant absolute malice. Your era is over, cousin, Julianne sneered, her voice echoing over the clash of steel. Die like the dog you are. Not today, Commander, I shouted, my voice cutting through the ambient roar of the battle like a silver bell. Before she could drop her blade, I slammed my weight against the heavy brass lever concealed behind the secondary pillar, the master release for the Citadel's oil-fed winter heating ducts. A deep, subterranean groan vibrated through the floor, followed instantly by a violent burst of pressurized flame that erupted from the floor grates surrounding the dais. A wall of roaring, orange fire shot 15 feet into the air, completely separating Julianne and her immediate mutineers from the rest of their rebel reinforcements. The sudden blinding heatwave forced Julianne back half a step, her eyes widening in a moment of pure, startled panic. Through the curtain of fire, I lunged forward, my iron-bound wrists swinging high. I didn't strike her body. I struck the iron sconce holding the master pitch torch above the throne, sending the heavy, burning iron cage crashing directly onto the steps between her and Kalen. Clara. Kalen gasped, his amber eyes unfocused, his towering frame trembling as he looked up at me through the smoke. The dangerous, magnetic bond that had been pulling us together for 30 days suddenly flared into a brilliant, undeniable reality. He saw that I hadn't fled to save myself. I had walked into the mouth of hell to drag him out of it. Quiet, King Kalen, I said, dropping to my knees beside him, my hands instantly tearing a strip of fabric from my tunic to wrap tightly around his bleeding, poisoned ribs to slow the toxin's spread. You told me 30 days ago that you wanted to see if my mind was as sharp as my tongue. Now, get up and prove to me that your crown isn't just a heavy piece of silver. A sudden, intense surge of primal strength seemed to flood Kalen's veins at the touch of my hands. A profound spiritual awakening of his dormant alpha beast responding to the unyielding courage of a woman who refused to let him fall. The dark, toxic haze in his amber eyes cleared, replaced by a lethal, burning focus. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand gripping mine with an absolute, unshakable finality. If your heart is pounding right now, watching the captive maid ignite an entire courtroom to protect the ruler who tried to break her, please drop a comment below with the word rebel. Hit that subscribe button immediately because the final confrontation is about to begin, and the balance of power is turning upside down. The wall of fire began to crackle and recede as the fuel lines depleted, revealing Julianne standing on the other side, her face blackened with soot, her eyes flashing a dangerous, murderous red. She looked at the loyal guards who were finally pushing the rebels back toward the entrance, and then she looked at me standing side by side with the poisoned king. You think this petty trick changes anything, Clara? Julianne screamed, raising her sword once more, her scent spiking with a desperate final bloodlust. He is dying. The nightshade has no cure. I will cut you both to ribbons. The nightshade has a cure, Julianne, I said, standing tall in front of Kalen, my iron cuffs catching the light of the dying flames like a shield. My father wrote the manual on supernatural toxicology. And you forgot one critical detail about this room. The throne isn't the only thing made of obsidian. The silence that followed my words was loud, a dead space in the middle of a war zone. Julianne froze, her sword still raised, her gaze darting frantically from me to the massive blocks of polished obsidian that formed the dais, the pillars, and the high throne behind us. The bloodlust in her scent suddenly curdled into an erratic, chaotic panic. The throne. Julianne stammered, her voice dropping an octave as she looked at the dark stone. What are you talking about, slave? Obsidian isn't just a symbol of your power, Julianne, I said, my voice carrying an absolute, unshakable authority that made the remaining rebel warriors lower their weapons in confusion. It is a natural volcanic glass. When the ancient founders built this citadel, they didn't just place the throne randomly. They built it directly over a geothermal fault line to keep the palace warm during the dark winters. And my father's journals noted that beneath this very dais lies a subterranean reservoir of mineral-rich volcanic sulfur water, the only natural compound capable of binding to and neutralizing nightshade toxins in a Lycan's bloodstream. I turned my back on her completely, a calculated display of absolute disdain. I dropped to my knees beside Kaelin, whose breathing had become shallow and rattling, his skin turning a terrifying shade of translucent gray. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I slammed my iron-bound wrists against the decorative brass drainage valve built into the base of the obsidian dais. The mechanism groaned, and then a steaming dark stream of hot sulfurous mineral water began to flood the stone channel around the throne. I soaked the tattered remains of my linen sleeves in the burning water and pressed the compress directly against Kaelin's black, poisoned wound. Kaelin let out a raw, guttural roar as the boiling minerals met the dark toxin. The black veins radiating across his chest rippled violently, then began to recede, the purulent nightshade poison draining from his body in thick, dark droplets as his legendary alpha healing factor aggressively kicked back to life. The amber glow in his eyes returned with the force of a supernova. Kill her! Julianne shrieked, realizing her ultimate leverage had just dissolved into steam. She lunged forward, her blade aimed directly at my exposed throat. Kill the human-born bitch. But she never reached me. Kaelin rose from the stone floor like a dormant god awakened by a lightning strike. The massive expanse of his chest heaved as his alpha aura exploded into the room with the force of a physical hurricane, completely crushing the remaining will of the mutineers. With a single lightning-fast movement of his massive hand, he caught Julianne's downward-swinging sword blade with his bare, claw-tipped palm, the steel shattering into a dozen useless fragments under the sheer pressure of his grip. "My kingdom," Kaelin roared, his voice shaking the stone foundations of the entire Eclipse citadel, "is not yours to burn, Julianne." He stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow of absolute doom over his terrified cousin. With a brutal, fluid motion, he drove his fist into her chest plate, shattering the iron armor and sending her flying across the courtroom floor. She crashed violently against the stone pillars, her dagger clattering into the darkness as the loyal royal guard immediately swarmed her, pinning her to the floor in heavy steel chains. The remaining Eastern rebels threw their weapons down, falling to their knees in absolute, whimpering submission as the terrifying, invincible Lycan King stood victorious amidst the smoke and ruins of his own throne room. The mutiny was over. The crown was saved. If your adrenaline is absolutely surging right now, watching the Lycan King completely reclaim his throne through the brilliant mind of the woman he tried to break, please take a quick second to leave a comment below with the word triumph. Hit that subscribe button immediately because the balance of power in this kingdom is about to change forever. Kaelin didn't look at the cheering lords in the galleries. He didn't look at the captured traitors. He turned his massive, scarred body slowly, his breathing heavy, and looked down at me where I stood by the obsidian drainage valve, my tattered clothes covered in soot and his own blood, my hands still bound by the heavy iron cuffs. The silence between us was heavy with 20 days of unspoken tension, growing attraction, and a deep, unvarnished emotional truth that could no longer be denied. In front of the entire royal court, the hundreds of noble wolves, and the battle-hardened warriors who had spent weeks treating me like property, the most feared, cold ruler in the supernatural kingdoms did something that shocked the realm to its absolute core. King Kaelin Vance slowly dropped to his right knee, bowing his heavy silver crown before me, his large, calloused hand reaching out to gently cradle my bound wrists. The heavy silence that blanketed the grand courtroom was no longer the silence of fear, but of absolute reverence. 500 high lords, noble wolves and battle-hardened warriors stood frozen in the stone galleries, their breaths hitched as they witnessed the unthinkable. King Kaelin Vance, the cold, invincible butcher of the northern realms, remained on his knee before me, his heavy silver crown tilted toward the cracked, soot-covered stone floor. He reached up, his massive calloused fingers gently gripping the heavy iron cuffs that had bound my wrists for 30 long days. With a slow, deliberate application of his alpha strength, the metal groaned, fractured, and snapped completely. The heavy iron bands clattered onto the obsidian steps, leaving my wrists free for the first time since my territory was conquered. For 30 days I believed I had brought a captive into my home to display my power, Kalen said, his deep, rumbling baritone carrying a raw, unvarnished vulnerability that echoed beautifully through the high stone rafters. He looked up, his amber eyes burning with an intense, fierce devotion that shattered every remaining wall around his heart. But tonight you showed this court what a true ruler looks like. You did not use a sword to save my life, Clara. You used an unbroken spirit and a brilliant mind. This crown belongs to a kingdom that would be dust without you. He stood up, his towering muscular frame standardizing beside me, and turned to face the entire assembly of Pax. From this day forward, the Silver Moon people are no longer captives or servants of the state. Their lands are restored, their independence is guaranteed by royal decree, and their daughter will sit beside me as the true, undisputed high strategist of the northern kingdoms. A thunderous, deafening roar of approval exploded from the galleries. The very lords who had demanded my execution hours before were now bowing their heads in deep, profound respect, their collective cheers shaking the dust from the timber beams. Before I step off this dais and close this legendary chapter of my life, I want to speak directly to every single one of you watching from around the world tonight. This story is a testament to the fact that no matter how heavy the chains are that life tries to place around your neck, your mind, your dignity, and your resilience are things that no tyrant can ever truly conquer. If Clara's ultimate triumph and the sight of the Cold King kneeling at her feet inspired you tonight, please take a quick moment to leave a comment below with your favorite part of her strategy. Hit that subscribe button right now to join our incredible growing family and drop a like on this video. Your beautiful energy is what keeps this channel alive. I walked out of the smoke-shattered courtroom, stepping through the grand arched doorways and onto the high stone terrace of the Eclipse Citadel. The biting winter wind had softened, replaced by a crisp, clear midnight air that carried the fresh scent of pine and distant mountain snow. The vast northern kingdom lay stretched out before me under the soft, silver glow of the full moon. I took a deep, completely unrestricted breath, the tattered linens of my tunic rustling gently against my legs. I looked down at my bare wrists, the skin slightly bruised from the iron but entirely free. I was no longer a slave. I was no longer a nameless stray hidden in the shadows of a tyrant's court. I turned my head slightly as a heavy, warm wolfskin cloak was gently draped over my shoulders. Kalen stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the sprawling horizon we would now govern together, his hand sliding into mine with a quiet, unshakable finality. The dangerous game of survival was over, the corruption had been burned away, and as the dawn began to break over the distant peaks, a beautiful, victorious era of love, justice, and new beginnings was finally ours to rewrite.